Welcome to the Rusted Garden. We will get started in about 30 seconds. I'm just going to set up a few things and we'll wait for people to join. If you have a question, please, I see somebody already put one up there, just type question in front of it because the chat really gets full and it's hard for me to pick out your questions. And again, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. All right, welcome to Garden Grounds. I am going to just get the chat set up here real quick. All right, it's popped up. So I do every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. I do Garden Grounds, which is my public live mentoring Q&A, and you can ask any question you want with respect to vegetable gardening. Just make sure you put the word question in front so that I can pick it out. If you've seen that I've gone by it, please put it back into the chat. It gets really full, so sometimes I do miss the questions. I'll stay on for about 45 minutes. Today, the light topic that I'm going to discuss is really beating the summer heat, and we'll be talking about shade cloth and some other things that will help you kind of manage the 95-degree days like we've had here for the last 3 weeks. We've had one day of rain. It's just been crazy hot and no rain. It's not typical for Maryland. I'm in Maryland Zone 7. If you like this format, I have perk memberships where it's a small fee monthly. I do 4 or 5 of these mentoring Q&As. There are, anywhere from 20 to 40 people in the chat. It's very small. I stay on for about an hour and I can help you with your gardens. And if you see anybody with their name in green with a star and a circle, they are perk members, and you can just ask them, if it's a good experience. They're all very smart. So it's not just me giving out information and sharing information. The whole group helps each other out. So let's get started with some questions, and then we will get to talking about beating the summer heat. All right, so eaglet. Tomato plant has yellowing fungus leaves and stems are yellow with brown streaks. Is it fusarium wilt? I don't know. Sometimes I can't pronounce things. So when you have lesions in the stem, that's not really a good sign. I don't know what it is. I can't really diagnose it without seeing it, but sometimes that's bacterial lesions and stuff like that. So it can be problematic. I've had that a couple of times. Not much has helped. I would try spraying. You treated with H2O and Daconil so far. If you've already sprayed with hydrogen peroxide, it's not helping. Daconil, for those of you that don't know it, it's not organic, but it's very effective at fixing problems. So if you have a major outbreak with respect to fungus and issues like that, it really stops the outbreak. Organic is wonderful until it's not working and you're losing crops. So Daconil is pretty strong. H2O2 is pretty strong. I don't know exactly what it is, but when you get those kind of lesions in the stem, it's not a good sign. I wish I could be more helpful. I don't think there is a way to save it. And yeah, good morning, everybody. Michelle, how do I get rid of worms in my Roma tomatoes? So I am assuming you're not talking about earthworms in the earth, because those are good. Some sort of caterpillar is crawling and chewing in your leaves or into the Roma tomatoes. There's several ways to manage it. You can use neem oil spray. Neem oil is organic. I sell that at my seed and garden shop at therustedgarden.com. That basically you coat the plant, the worm eats it, it dies off. It can take a while. Most worms, any chewing caterpillar will die off from that. If it's an outbreak and it's bad, I would go to an insect dust. You can try spinosad. The brand that I use is Captain Jack's. Any brand that has spinosad is fine. I'm not particular with Captain Jack's, but that's the one you see everywhere. Spinosad is organic. It's a dust that you put onto the leaves. I would do it later in the evening after the pollinators go away. The worms will come out, they'll chew. That might work. If it's not working with, say, neem oil or the organic spinosad, neem oil is organic also, then I might go to 7-Dust, which people are going to blast me because it's a chemical. Everything is a chemical. Gardening chemicals aren't necessarily bad unless you abuse them and really kind of wreck your garden with it. If you need a light dusting of something stronger to break an infestation, you might want to consider some of the chemicals. If you don't want to do that, the neem oil, the spinosad works most of the time. And you just kind of have to stick with those and see how they go. And part of like what I want to teach too is I don't want to be like, you need to be pure 100% organic, or you need to have beautiful 100% organic soil, or you can never use a chemical type fertilizer. That just doesn't work. Nobody necessarily has endless compost. I do. After 20 years, I've been, moved to a place where I have endless compost. I can make great soil. If I just told you guys to make compost, use it in a garden, I'm leaving most of you out. Not everybody can afford organic fertilizers. They can be really expensive. The chemical types are fine, especially in containers. Anyway, I'm kind of getting on my soapbox. But I'm not saying use one or the other. I just want to educate you all, and then you can kind of pick and choose what you feel is best for your garden. Let's see. And again, I'm just kind of trying to catch up. The chat really fills up quickly, so we'll just go with this one. Irene, can I use Monterey takedown in the evening in temperatures over 80? Will it burn my plants? I have not used that product before. The evening, if it is a spray, which I'm assuming you are saying, when it gets this hot, when it gets to 95 to 100 degrees, you don't want to be spraying, in the full sun. The leaves usually get floppy and they lose water pressure. Later in the evening, when things cool down, it should be fine. I just haven't used the Monterey takedown before, but if you have a problem and you need to spray, spraying later in the evening is really the best time to do it, especially now with the heat. And that's part of what I'll be talking about. In order to beat the heat, you do a lot of your work later in the evening as a gardener. We don't want to get exhausted. Sprays are best done later in the evening too. Jenny, is it too late to start cabbage seeds when first frost date is about September 15th? So I just did a live on Tuesday at 12 o'clock. If you want to check that out, I'll answer your question. But every beginning of every month, sometime in that first week, I'm going to do a live just like this, and I'm going to talk about what you can plant. Cabbage can take a frost. It tastes better in a frost. So, if the frosts just start rolling in September, I think you have plenty of time. I think you can direct seed cabbage now. You might want to go with, like early Jersey Wakefield that matures a little bit more quickly, but they can take a frost. They're going to be okay. So if you get those seeds started now, they're going to grow nicely in the warmth. They're going to get established, and then the coolness of your August, September start rolling in. We don't really get frost till later October. So in Maryland, I have plenty of time to plant the cool weather crops, but I think you can definitely start the cabbage. And what I always say, let me have a drink real quick, is when in doubt, experiment. So get some different cabbages in now, different cool weather crops, and just see how they do. Worst case is you get a lot of leaves, which you can eat. Maybe you don't get a perfect cabbage. If you're trying broccoli or cauliflower, you're going to get leaves, which you can actually eat too. Anyway, if you experiment, next year you'll know to start a little bit early, or you'll know that this time really, really works. All right, so we did get the worms on the tomatoes. Robert, tomato plants are in cages and were about 6 feet tall when the wind came blowing through last night. They got blown over a bit, and I had to trim about 2 feet off the top. Any long-term damage? No. I mean, the beauty about tomatoes is that they're vines, and you get the, first growth that comes out. But then every joint where you have the main stem and the leaf, the sucker comes out. That sucker will turn into a production stem, and it flowers, it fruits, and you're going to get a bunch of those, and you can just retrain those going upward. So you're going to be okay. Sue, I have my asparagus bed for about 8 years with great success. This year's the fronds have grown 6 feet tall. The recent storms have beaten them down. Is it okay to trim? Yep, you can go ahead and trim them. Sometimes too, when you cut down the summer growth of your asparagus, it may send up some new shoots at the bottom. You can actually eat those, but you're not going to harm anything, and you can kind of just trim them up. My asparagus about now starts getting really big and flopping over, and I cut off a lot of it just to kind of maintain the hedge so that it doesn't shadow basically my pepper plants that are in a container garden next to it and create shadows on them. So I trim it a lot. Julie, who is a perk member, you see her name's in green and she's got that little star. I've harvested my garlic, leaving an empty 100-gallon grow bag. I'm in zone 6A. What can I plant and harvest before garlic in late October? I have plenty of squash, cukes, and beans. So I was going to say cucumbers and beans, but you have plenty of them. Let me just think for a second. Other people, this is a great time to just throw things in there. I mean, you really have time to grow most things, really. You could grow some determinate tomatoes would be okay. You could even, technically probably get well, I'm not sure when your frost comes, but I'm assuming sometime in October. You could even get in a cherry tomato. But you can do, in that huge bag, you can put in other root crops. You can put in turnips, you can put in beets, and harvest them. While they're still in the bag, you can tuck your garlic in around them, and they'll establish. You'll pull out the beets and the turnips, and you'll be good to go. Putting in beets and turnips now is great because they establish, they grow, they prefer the cool weather, and then you can go ahead, and harvest them in the fall, and then your garlic can be tucked in around it. Unless, you don't need perfect lines and perfect spacing for the garlic. You can just generally space it out around all that stuff. But I would just go with what you like. You have a lot of time to grow. Hoochly, what is an effective treatment for whitefly on tomatoes and peppers? They are a pain. So the first thing I would do is try a oil spray. It can be any kind of horticultural oil. Just make sure you mix it for tomato plants. That sticks to the flies. It helps reduce the population. I find it doesn't always work really well. You have to do a couple applications. If I have an outbreak, I try using the spinosad dust first, which is organic, and that's pretty effective. When you're putting down any dust, if it's organic, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not harmful. Doesn't necessarily mean you want to ingest it. It is safer. But insect dust of any type is going to kill good and bad insects. So when you're putting that all over a leaf or all over a plant, just keep in mind any dust, organic or not, can kill good insects. I would try the oil spray, and I would, maybe hit it again in a couple of days. You just want to be careful. You don't oversaturate the leaves with oil. That can harm them. It's also hot in a lot of areas. If that doesn't really work, then I would go to trying maybe the spinosad dust, or it comes in a spray, and I would spray the undersides of the leaves and really see if that helps manage them down. Question. It's been in the upper 90s. I've had everything covered during the day. It's finally starting to drop to about 85 to 87. Is it okay to remove the shade cloth? Yeah, it's okay to remove the shade cloth. And let's just kind of start here with what I wanted to talk about. So the summer heat rolls in. We're getting ridiculous heat in the upper 90s. It's staying for weeks at a time in many places. The thing that you're doing to help manage the heat and help your garden manage the heat is you're really worried about the top 2, 4, 6, 8 inches of the surface soil. Most plants, and I'm really talking today about tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, but most plants put out surface roots. When that sun is just beating down, 8, 10, 12 hours in some cases, it is heating that soil temperature up to sometimes well over 100 degrees. That sends a signal to your plants to shut down. They go into survival mode. Your tomatoes will drop blossoms. They may drop fruit. Same with your peppers. Your cucumbers just get the heck beat out of them. So things you can do is you can certainly put down mulch, and that helps keep the soil cooler. You want to water regularly. Watering really does cool the soil down. However, with the sun beating down, it's a lot of watering. The next thing you can do is add shade cloth, and I just want to show you this one. This is a 50% shade cloth, and you can see me through it mostly. This blocks out 50% of the sun. In most cases, you can hear my dog barking in the background, I think an Amazon delivery is coming in. In most cases, you can leave this over your summer garden and it doesn't do any harm. Plenty of sunlight gets through. What this does is it creates shade and it cools the roots down really, really well and cools the soil down. Well, it cools the soil down, which keeps the roots cooler. And this way your tomato plants continue to flower, continue to produce fruit. Tomatoes, I cover them with a 50% or 70% shade cloth. This is a 70% shade cloth. It's much thicker and it's hard to see me. It's really dense. I don't know if you can see the holes if I get closer. But even with this, enough sunlight gets through to the tomatoes that they do okay. If you're in places not like Maryland where you're getting crazy upper 90, 100 degree temperatures, 70% shade cloth is okay. When it drops into the 80s, try and remove, the 70%. But the 50%, you can certainly, keep up, and it keeps things cooler, and it still lets in plenty of light. They come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. I do not sell them at my seed shop, but you can, look online and find whatever shape you need. And then just real quick, you can see a really big shade cloth out there on the grass. That's going to go over my cattle panel arch, and that's what's going to protect a good grouping of my tomato plants. I also put the shade cloth down in a way when I'm using the 70% that coming in the sides, there might be some, eastern light getting in there, a little bit of western light getting in there. But the southern sun is what you want to block from your plants. The high noon sun over the noon period, when the sun is in the southern part of the sky, put up your shade cloth to block that sun. And then the way my garden's set up, the sun tracks west, and then light will come into the side of the cattle panel arch. Shade cloth will make a huge difference, and you can just use it in so many different ways. All right, let's see. And if you have questions about that, go ahead and throw it up there. So you can remove the shade cloth, certainly. My pepper plants are healthy, but all the leaves, no peppers in Michigan. Suzanne, if they're healthy, they're growing, they're green, I wouldn't necessarily feed them anymore. You're doing a good job. Just keep them watered, and they're going to work it out. Sometimes they just take longer, but there is no way, even though you might see it online, there is no way to really increase flowers or get plants to flower more early. And when you talk about cucumbers and squash, you can't really make them be male or female flowers. It is true that if you do sometimes increase the potassium and phosphorus, you get more flowers with your pepper plants. You'll hear, stop using nitrogen, use more phosphorus. The only issue with that is a healthy pepper plant, let's just say, produces 100 flowers for the math. If you add in more potassium and phosphorus, a 20% increase is pretty good. So you get 120 flowers. You don't really need that many. So if your peppers and your plants are producing flowers, the additional phosphorus, potassium combination of those may be true, but sometimes it's just an extra expense and it's just an extra chore you have to do. Remember, compost is well below a 111 NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You can grow anything in a bed with lots of compost and a top dressing of compost, and you're not necessarily jacking up any of those elements in there. Robert, what indicators should I look at for my jalapeno and banana peppers to indicate they are ready to be picked? Size, color, something else? Well, they vary. My dog just walked in here. They vary. Banana peppers, you want them to get to a good size. But with any pepper, most of them start out green and then they change color. You just let them grow to the size that you like how they look. Banana peppers can turn kind of an orange. They can kind of turn red. But you can eat them at any size. Jalapenos, sometimes you can get mammoth ones. They're really big. Sometimes you get early ones. They're smaller. But when they're about the size of my thumb, what is that? Well, probably not quite 2 inches. But when a jalapeno is, about 2 inches in size, it's ready to pick. They will also turn red. So the longer you leave them on, they're going to change color. But it's really up to you. And, you're going to see them progress in size, taste them at different points, and, see where you like them the best. Jenny, I have a problem with grasshoppers that I can't. What can I do to stop them from munching on my garden down to nothing? That's when I would use, insect dust. And again, the spinosad, and you want to read if spinosad kills grasshoppers. I think it does. I can't remember off the top of my head. Neem oil is from the neem tree, and you definitely, if you buy neem oil, let me just clarify that too. So at my seed shop, I sell cold pressed neem oil. That has all the natural components in there, and the main component in neem oil, in neem oil is azadirachtin, and you need that component. That's what the chewing worm or the insect eats, and it shuts down their stomach and they die off. It does some other things. When you go to the stores, the big box stores, if you see in the corner hydrophobic, hydrophobic, hydrophobic extract of neem, they've taken all the good stuff out of there, and it's nothing more than an oil spray. It could be olive oil. That kind of neem oil is not going to work. So if you buy neem oil, you want to get 100% cold pressed. Okay. So you could spray your plants with neem oil. The grasshoppers would eat that. Good chance it's going to kill them off. If it's a crazy infestation, that's when I do go to 7 dust. Rarely, maybe once a year I have to use it on a certain plant. I do use it on flea beetles on my eggplants. That's really effective, and that pretty much kills everything. However, it's not organic. But I would try, something out of the 3 that I gave you. How do you get rid of groundhogs? No one's going to like this answer. Well, some people may not care. You either have to shoot them or you have to trap and release them. Nothing else really works. I've trapped and released 1 groundhog here in Maryland. Let me just make sure I got the right one. Yeah, it was a groundhog. I called and asked for help, and the animal control said, oh, you can shoot them. They're not protected. Well, I don't want to shoot them, but I was lucky enough to trap it. The other thing you can do is you can try and find out where it's living and it's made its home and just really disturb that area, and sometimes they end up leaving. But they're really destructive. All right, I need to find out where I left off here. And if you want, if you do a super chat, I will take that question with priority. We're only at 11:23, so I'll go to at least 11:45. But we got a really good group here, and the questions are coming in pretty fast. Question from Irene. My sugar baby watermelon is still so small. They're being shaded by my squash. I planted them to go up an arch at the end of the bed behind the squash. They were supposed to be taller by now. So you can remove leaves from your squash if that will help get some sun in there. If they're growing slowly, there's nothing wrong with giving them a good drink of a water-soluble fertilizer. That may help them grow. But sometimes, with squash, you can just remove the leaves, and that helps. Or try and get the melon growing towards the sun. But you really, keep it watered. You're going to feed it, trying to get it the most sun. All you can do is sit back and wait. It is, again, I'm in Maryland Zone 7. Depending where you are, you still have time to put in watermelon seeds. Maybe a shorter day melon versus, shorter to harvest melon, not a shorter day melon, but a shorter to harvest melon. My whole planting area is shaded out by my house most of the fall and all winter. Does this change my planting time, or should I try and find a spot that gets sun to plant? Coco, you definitely want your garden space to be getting 8 hours of sun. People always say, well, what can I grow if I get 6 hours? Or what can I grow if I have less? You can grow some leafy greens, but you really need 8 full hours of sun. So wherever you can move your garden to get that that would be best. Remember that if you're putting out a question, you need to put question in front of it, or I'm probably not going to see it. I'm just buzzing down here looking for the word question to pop out, or a bunch of question marks for this one too. Getting tomatoes rotten at the bottom like a bug got in. What do you advise? What do you think as the cause? Thank you. Tomatoes that rot at the bottom, it's usually blossom end rot, happens a lot in containers, and it mostly happens because it's a watering issue, that it's just getting so hot, the water isn't consistent, the root system can't pull in the nutrients it needs. In this case, it can't pull in the calcium. The plant takes the nutrients from the lower tomatoes and lower leaves, sends them to the top of the plant to keep growing, and you end up with blossom end rot. So the solution is give them a good feeding of a water-soluble fertilizer. You can add in some calcium with like lime. Most of the time it's in your water-soluble. I recommend AgroThrive as the organic water-soluble. I'm affiliated with them. You can find them in the video description. That has all the nutrients. So you're sort of giving them the nutrients that they need. And it can be in the ground too. Sometimes it happens with Roma and Marzano type tomatoes in the ground. Give them a good feeding, but then you want to make sure the watering is staying consistent and the plants aren't drying out, especially in a container. If they dry out fully, it damages the roots. You get a nutritional issue because the roots can't pull in that nutrition, and then you get blossom end rot. And this can happen for peppers. It can happen for other vegetables too. She Crafty, I have bought and followed your instructions on the neem oil and the other oils on my squash and cucumbers, and I still can't get rid of the powdery mildew to save my life. Any other suggestions? So neem oil and oil sprays can work to manage fungus, and it coats the fungal spores. It slows down their ability to kind of multiply and reproduce. Sometimes it doesn't work. It can be a different variety of, powdery mildew, different kind of fungus. You would, in this case, maybe look for another antifungal. It could be like a sulfur spray, which raises the acidity on the leaf, and sometimes that kills off the fungus. It could be, it raises the acidity. So sulfur spray raises the acidity, lowers the pH, and that can kill off the fungus. You can use a baking soda spray that raises the pH and increases alkalinity, and that also can kill off fungus because the fungus wants to grow in this very specific pH on the leaf, and baking soda and sulfur will change that. Just don't use both of them. We talked before about daconil, which is a chemical. It's not organic. That's really effective. That would work typically on your squash. Your big fruited vegetables, I'm sometimes more comfortable using a stronger antifungal because they can be washed. Yes, people are concerned sometimes the chemicals can be absorbed through the plants, and again, that's a personal choice that you have to research. Looking for the questions here real quick. Things just start bouncing around. Hold on. Oh my lord, there's a lot of questions. All right. Amy, my seedlings are getting eaten by insects. Any suggestions? So there's a lot of insects now in the heat. Sometimes the benefit of starting your summer crops, even though they can be direct seeded real easily, is that you can get them to a size, and then you grow transplants on a little flat somewhere in a protected area at your house outside, and then you put them into your garden. It's really tough. I mean, I use snail and slug bait because snail and slugs can be the main issue. They just crawl over, chew down the new growth. Snail and slug bait, there's plenty of different baits out there. You want to find the ones that have iron phosphate in them or sulfur in them. They're safer. They're considered organic. You scatter them broadly around. The snails and slugs eat them. They die off in a couple of days. That's if the culprits are snails and slugs. If it's something else, sometimes it's hard to see. I would go with the sprays. I'm sorry, I would go with the dust, because the dusts tend to be more quicker acting. If you put down like neem oil or BT and the plants are still small, the insect can still come and eat a lot of that plant because it doesn't kill them right away, and then you still have crop loss. Brick or Giuseppe, can you take a sucker from a determinate tomato and root it? Will it stay small? You can clone it. So anytime in that joint of any tomato plant, the sucker comes out, you break it off when it's about, 3 inches tall or something, 4 inches, you can put that sucker into water on a windowsill, and maybe, 8 out of 10 times it's going to root. It can take 3 or 4 weeks for it to get a nice root system, and then you can plant that, be it determinate or indeterminate. And it is going to grow and it's going to take off, and it becomes an exact clone of that tomato plant. Brick, I prepped, fed, and watered my apple tree better than ever. It put on plenty of blooms, fruits, and just about all the baby apples fell off. I pruned it a lot this spring, but it bloomed fine. I mean, you're probably doing the right thing. Apples are really tricky. I've not mastered yet, but I've gotten pears down. I've gotten peaches down. I'm still struggling with apples. And even though apples, you get a lot of blooms, sometimes they don't all get pollinated for some reason. So you get the apple started and they just fall off. Diseases can set in. They are pretty tricky. With everything that you're doing, you fed, you watered, you've pruned, I would check in your area to see what kind of fungus and diseases and insects come to your apple trees, because they usually need to be sprayed. And you can go organic with it. But probably the next thing you want to add in is a spray routine at the right time, and that will help kind of manage that. But I don't know exactly, why that happened. Irene, I found a patch of baby stink bugs with eggs on an eggplant leaf. There are probably more, but haven't found yet. How do I treat? So stink bugs, squash bugs tend to stay on zucchini and squash. If they don't have that, they will go to cucumbers. They will go to other plants. All you can do with the squash bugs and even the stink bugs, you know what? And I read before, I think there's a slight difference, but they're very similar. Anyway, somebody can correct me. But you turn the leaves over and you have to inspect for those orange bronzy looking eggs, and you try and remove them all. The other thing I do is I water the base of my plants. When the adult bugs come up, I grab them, I squash them, I throw them away. There isn't a great way to, even the dust, I'm not going to recommend for this, because it doesn't work that well with the stink bugs or the squash bugs. It's just a lot of manual work to remove the eggs, and when the eggs hatch and you see the little nymphs, smash them with your thumb. All right. Any ideas why garlic gets brown spots? Also have a couple of cloves that went bad. The rest of my garlic is fine. No, I mean, I would get some sort of fungus or bacteria, or, something nicked the cloves, when they were growing in the ground. But I don't think that's too uncommon, especially if you're curing them outside and it's hot and it's humid, bacteria and stuff can get to them. Rebecca, is it too late to plant cilantro seeds or lettuce seeds in Wisconsin? No, lettuce can take a freeze. The leaves can actually freeze. Cilantro prefers the cold weather, so you can certainly try and plant some now. It might be too early for lettuce. I'm not sure in Wisconsin, but it's too early here in Maryland. Maybe first week of August I'll plant some. But you can plant your lettuce, your cilantro now in many areas, or in a little bit, and you're just getting it established with all this warmth, and then it moves into the cool season and it does what it needs to do. The problem with lettuce, and we're talking about managing heat, if you want to put up a shade cloth and grow some of your cool weather crops, that's probably best. When your lettuce, your spinach, a lot of your cool weather crops, bok choy, pak choy, are planted now, they just go really quickly to flowering. That's because their roots are so warm, and they get a signal that when the roots are really warm, it's time to flower and produce seed. So if you use a shade cloth with your cool crops now, very often you can get them planted earlier and you protect them, and then you get a great harvest come fall. I mean, shade cloth can be really used to cool down your cucumber plants, your tomato plants, your pepper plants, but it can also be used to get your cool weather crops out sooner. All right. Jen, one would think the shade cloth being black would make things hotter. Do they make it in lighter colors? I live in a really hot area. I don't want to burn up my tomato plants. It is so thin that it doesn't hold any heat. The heat would hit the shade cloth, stay absorbed in the shade cloth, and then the wind comes and cools it down. So unless you're like laying it right on top of the plants, maybe that's an issue, but it does come in other colors. You can find it in green. You can find it in reflective aluminum. I think it's more expensive, but you can find different color shade cloth. But if it's above your plants by like, even a foot, but, by a couple feet, it's just not going to make anything hotter. It's going to do what it needs to do. Big Will Dog. I have strawberry plants in pots and in the GreenStalk. All have made plenty of fruit, not overwatered, but a hit or miss on sweetness. Any tips to encourage sweeter berries? It is kind of hit or miss. I mean, you'll see all kinds of stuff. If you're watered consistently and it's been even and they've been fed, it's just kind of what's happening. Hot days that come too quickly can be an issue. I mean, strawberries are best when the days are cooler and they've got time to ripen slowly and they're not being pounded by the heat. There really is no secret. This is kind of one of the things. Like, you'll find stuff that say do A, B, and C, but if it were true, so many of us would be, look, all you got to do is this one thing, and you have the sweetest strawberries ever. There really isn't anything to do. Sunshine. My honeydew melon was planted next to a more mature melon, and it is taking a long time to get big. How big does a melon plant need to be to allow flowers to blossom? Well, I don't know the answer to it, because if you grow a cucumber plant in a small container and the plant gets roots that are constricted in that little container, that cucumber plant's only going to get about this long. It's going to flower and it's going to produce fruit. So it's not always based on the size. There's a lot of factors that go into it. The plant, after germination, a good 4 weeks of growth, 5 weeks of growth, it should be getting to a good size and the flowers should be there, but I don't really have enough information. If it's not growing well, anytime plants aren't growing well, you want to make sure you're giving them enough water and the larger melon isn't taking all the water. You can also hit it with a water-soluble fertilizer right now. Again, I recommend AgroThrive. If you I'm affiliated with them. It's in the video description. Fish emulsion works well. You can use the chemical types. They're more budget friendly. They're effective. I don't recommend using them every day instead of organic. If you use the chemical types, they usually have like a 24 nitrogen. Just cut it in half. You can save yourself a lot of money by doing the chemical types at half strength. All right, the thread or the chat just popped. Hold on. All right, here we go. Am I not supposed to remove the squash leaves above my squash fruits or flowers? If I remove specific leaves, will I not damage the plant where it stops producing? You can remove leaves. I have a whole video on squash care from, I think, last month. The leaves that are under the canopy, like you have big squash leaves and then you have leaves underneath, you can remove those. They're being shaded out. They're not doing a whole lot. But to answer your question, you can remove leaves and it's not going to kill your plant out. I like to remove the stuff that's under the bigger leaves of the canopy. I will remove out side leaves sometimes just to raise everything up, let airflow go in. I will remove leaves lower to the bottom so I can see in, get to some of those squash bugs. Manage the leaves better. I remove the leaves also so there's less places for the squash bugs to lay eggs, but you can definitely remove a lot of them. Judith, after planting mangoes from seed over 8 years ago, they never produced fruit. Can you recommend steps to help my plants produce blossoms and possibly fruit? I can't. I don't grow mangoes. They're 8 years. They're well established. You want to read up on how long it takes for a mango tree to become mature. The next thing is it can be sometimes related to nutrients in the soil. And in that case, I'm not saying you should run out and get a soil test, but if it's a bigger issue and you're wondering why it's not happening, it doesn't hurt to get a soil test. But a fruit tree fertilizer would be great to use now, and maybe use it in a little more concentration this year. Wash it into the soil, really get a lot of nutrients there, and see how it goes next year. But I don't know of any tricks, and just don't have enough experience to say why that's happening. Barb, I transferred a Honeycrisp tree in a small pot to a large container on a cloudy AM till I clear an area to plant in the ground. Most of the leaves have turned brown. Is it in shock? Yes, it's in shock. It doesn't mean it's going to die. Just keep it watered. I would try and move it out of the sun. Just put it in a shady area and let it recover. I cannot find iron phosphate alone to add to the soil for earwigs and slugs. What other amendment? So let me just be clear. I don't know of a source you can just get iron phosphate. Snails and slugs aren't going to eat iron phosphate alone. So if I wasn't clear, let me just clarify it. You're buying slug and snail baits. They are baited pellets. They are baited so that the slug is attracted to them. But in these baited pellets is usually iron phosphate or sulfur. And those are what you want to use to manage snails and slugs. Irene said Sluggo Plus kills the pincher bugs and pill bugs. And I've heard a lot of people say that the baited snail and slug bait pellets, again, I want to say that they're baited, do work on pill bugs. I'm shading my peppers to prevent sun scald. Is it okay to leave the cloth up all day? Or should I apply the cloth during the heat of the day? I mean, if it's in the 90s, it depends on your shade cloth. I mean, if it's a 50% and it looks something like this, you can just leave it up all the time. For peppers, you really don't want to get past the 50%. I find they can take the heat better. Also, if you're not normally getting sun scald, if there's a lot of leaves on your plant, that should protect the peppers too. But you could leave it up. All right, trying to find out where I left off here. Jay, do you have any tips on removing rabbits? Are there any sprays, scents that would be effective? I'm not against trapping and physical removal if it would work better. I have to remove squirrels. There is, the stuff you put down like rabbit scram and all that scented stuff. That might work, but once it rains, it's gone. They get used to it. Rabbits can, get in many places. They're pretty destructive. What I have found, if you're growing seedlings and you're growing something that they're kind of shearing down, I do put down, at times I put down chicken wire with the big holes, and I just lay that over my planting area. I've let lettuce grow through it before, peas grow through it. Rabbits don't like walking on that, and they will stay away. But that's more of a physical barrier. Trapping them, they're pretty skittish, so it's really hard to get a rabbit to go into a trap. Squirrels will go right into a trap. Sometimes raccoons will too, but squirrels are tough. Jay, a few tomato plants are rather small and producing flowers. Should I pluck them off till the plant grows a bit stronger and bigger? I mean, you can. You don't have to. I would, again, when plants are small and they're struggling, just hit them again with a water-soluble fertilizer. See if they green up. See if they start growing. If they're not growing in 7-10 days, give them a little more. After that, you've given them the nutrients, and kind of, just keep an eye on it. But I mean, the tomato plants want to grow. So even if there's flowers on there, it should still take off. I mean, if there are big tomatoes on there, that's going to be sapping the energy out. I would just keep an eye on it. Question, my peppermint plant seems like it's dying at the base. I see powdery mildew substance, maybe tiny flying bugs at the base, on part of my pole beans, on lower leaves. What could that be? So peppermint plants, I use a lot of my peppermint, so I don't like spraying it because I use it for things. I mean, peppermint gets beat up. It's pretty hardy and it does survive. On your beans, on the lower leaves, a lot of times it's spider mites on the underside and they work their way up. They kill the bean off. So I use peppermint oil spray to manage spider mites on my beans and actually on my cucumber plants. All right. All right, just getting back to where I was here. Hold on. Holy moly. I am so glad so many people are here. We are at 11:40. Oh, time's just about up. So I will stay on a little bit longer, but time flies. Let's see if I can go through these quickly. Rebecca, my cauliflower plants are growing in my raised beds, but the leaves are kind of eaten by bugs. But will the cauliflower still grow? It depends. If it's in the 80s and 90s right now, and you're growing cauliflower, I don't know where you're at, it's probably not going to form heads because it's too warm. It's going to get this little crown and it's going to open up and flower and grow. They're best grown when the temperatures and nights are like in the 50s. The days don't get really past the 70s. Do you recommend a mid-season boost for any specific crop with a side dressing of either granular fertilizer or compost? If it's truly mid-season and the plants have been producing, any side dressing, sprinkling down some organic granular, watering it in, putting compost down on top of the soil, that's always good to do. Even if those plants don't need it, it's good to be there for when you rotate to your fall crops. You can remove the squash leaves very close to the base of the main stem. Yes. Interesting. I mean, I just saw this, but Root is a PERC member. She uses chives and borage near strawberries, so that's probably more in the ground, and it seems to help with the flavor. Question, ants went inside the thick stem of my squash. It's in a 15-gallon pot. They killed the plant. How can I remove the ants? So, I mean, real quick, if there's sugar-eating ants, you can make a ant bait out of borax, which is found in the grocery store in the laundry section. It's just called borax. It has a chemical in it. You mix it with sugar, the ants eat it, it kills them off. But I have plenty of videos on it. So if you look up ant baits, it shows you how to make them. And it's really effective. All right. Located in Maryland, I have a spearmint plant that attracted a lot of bugs in the soil, and it had a ton of tiny white dots on the leaves. Do you notice this problem with spearmint plants? I've not noticed that. A lot of people say mints are great at deterring bugs, but here's a case where bugs are coming to the plant, and bugs are opportunistic. They take whatever they can. It's not typical. The thing that you can do with spearmint has a great root system. If it's a really big problem, cut it down to the ground, hit it with a water-soluble fertilizer, and it will regrow, and usually you grow through the cycle of the insects. Travis, my tomato plants are huge and overlapping. Should I remove healthy leaves to create space in between or let them roll? You can let them roll. I like to prune the bottom of my plants to let air flow in. And then where plants overlap and mingle, you can remove some of the leaves. You don't have to, take a ton. And maybe do a compromise between kind of what we're talking about right now. Lisa, I'm in Maryland Zone 8. The grasshoppers are killing me. Do you recommend anything that won't hurt all my good bugs? No. See, that's the problem. Sprays and chemicals can't. I don't want to say don't really. They can't tell the difference between good and bad. So insect dust will kill grasshoppers, but there's a chance you could kill good bugs. But there's nothing that only targets grasshoppers. Brick top. Been fighting the vine borer for years. I'm an obsessive pruner. I tried not pruning my squash zucchini this year. It made a big difference by limiting portals for pests. Do you agree? It can make a big difference. Like if you find something that's working, go ahead and do that. The other thing that I like to do though is the vine borer has a specific life cycle. I can't recall it off the top of my head. Squash zucchini grow really quickly. While the vine borer is out doing its thing and you're managing it with your technique now, put in some new seeds. Direct seed some squash zucchini. They will grow, they will establish, and a lot of times the vine borer is gone, and then these plants are ready in as little as 35 days after germination, and you can move on and continue with your harvest. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Donna, where are we at with time? All right, a couple more. I'm in Zone 8, West Texas. What's the trick to growing eggplant? Mine are more brown and small, not purple. The plant was planted back in April. I don't know if there's a trick. They do like the heat. It might be too much heat. You know, I'll just go down the list. I mean, they like a nicely amended bed with lots of organic soil and compost in there. And I usually create a nice planting hole, get it in there. They can be slow to get started. Hit them with a water-soluble fertilizer like every 2 weeks until they get the nutrients. They usually green up, they take off. When they get really big root systems and you've been consistent with the watering, they get going and they get growing. You know, it's hard for me to say without seeing it, but eggplant tend to do pretty good with minimal care. I would, you know, especially in Texas, if you can get transplants, I would try another plant. All right, let me just go down to the bottom here. What's the best time to cut squash leaves? No time. Since you're removing them and you're killing off the leaf anyway, you can cut them anytime. Is there a cure for seed addiction? Seed Savers Anonymous. Do you accept heirloom seeds to try out? I don't have any. So one, no, there is no cure. I've cut down my addiction. I still have the impulse to buy. I have drawers full of seeds you can't see here I don't need. There's probably a Seed Saver Anonymous, but I think if we get a bunch of seed savers together, we're going to end up trading seeds. And right now, I'm not accepting any seeds because people are kind enough to send them to me. Sometimes I can't get to them, and I don't want to disappoint people that take the effort to send seeds. You know, maybe in the future, but thank you. My tomatoes have tiny black dots on the fruit. What should I do? It's hard to say without seeing a picture, but sometimes when you get dots actually on the tomatoes, that's more of a bacterial issue, and it's really hard to cure or manage. Sometimes the plant can fight it off, but you know, the basic things that you do is water consistently, give it a feeding of a water soluble, give it the nutrients it needs, and see if the plant can work it out. But when you have something happening to the fruit, it's usually bacterial, which means it's inside the plant system. It could be a fungus. You know, maybe it is a fungus, and you could try an antifungal on your plant, and that would cure it. But black dots on the tomatoes is usually a sign of some sort of bacteria. All right, Nate, aphids infested my potatoes, so I took them out. Can I reuse the soil? Yeah, insects are going to come in from everywhere. So reuse the soil. I mean, when you have aphids, I mean, they can be treated with a soapy water spray. They can be washed down, but you can't prevent insects from coming. The whole goal is to manage down the damage that they do. All right, here is the last question. Oh, you know what? Maybe a couple more will roll in. So Root says, in the north, moths lay the eggs in late June and early July. South, moths emerge in May. So she gave you a little bit of when the vine borer shows up in your general area. So you can definitely plant around the vine borer. I was reading a question, but then I got distracted. All right, white small curly bugs are eating my pepper roots. How do I treat them? Ooh, in the roots. So that's a tough one. So you can do a neem oil drench, which means you have to get the 100% cold pressed neem oil, 2 or 3 tablespoons in a gallon of water with some soap, like a tablespoon of soap. Really mix it up, and then you pour it into the root area of there. Whatever the bug is, it eats it. That's the organic way. You can try BT, which is another organic method, and you can just buy BT, mix it, pour it into the soil. That can help too. You can also get 7 dust, not organic. Sprinkle it around heavily onto the soil, wash it into the soil. That can work. Again, if you're concerned that a non-organic insect treatment is going to harm you, don't use it, but that's how you would use it. How do you mix peppermint spray oil? It's 2 teaspoons of peppermint oil in a gallon of water with a tablespoon of Castile type soaps, which is the cleanest and purest. If you're using detergents, 1 or 2 teaspoons of soap. Mix it through. You got to make sure the oil is mixed through the water before you spray it. All right, we are going to end there. I do this garden mentoring Q&A live, public, every second Thursday, every fourth Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. I will see you all next time. Good luck in your gardens. Okay, what do you think about the clay? I always can't pronounce clay. It's the clay dust, and it's just this very fine powder. People have used it. I have not tried it, but they say that it works really well. So let's just go with my mess up of the pronunciation. The kaolin clay is effective for a lot of insects. A lot of people use it on fruit trees. They dust the leaves of their squash. The dust gets into the shell of beetles. A lot of people say it's effective. I would give it a try. The clay is just a fine powder. You can really put that heavily on the stems of your squash and zucchini plant. And when the eggs hatch and that little basically caterpillar, what do you call it? Or it's sort of a maggot when it first hatches, but it's going to bore into the plant, and then it's going to grow into this big worm. Gets mixed up into clay, and people say that it's really effective. So I would give it a try. I'm glad I saw that, and I appreciate the super chat.